The sun cast a golden hue over Oak Ridge Heights, a suburban neighborhood known for its picturesque streets, neatly trimmed lawns, and quiet evenings. On the surface, it seemed like the perfect place to raise a family, a community that prided itself on its unity and safety. But beneath the manicured perfection, an ugly truth lingered, one that would soon come to light in the most unsettling way. For the Thompson family, moving to Oak Ridge Heights had been a dream come true. Darnell and Lisa Thompson had worked hard to afford their beautiful two-story home on Maplewood Drive. With their two children, 8-year-old Jamal and 12-year-old Ava, they were eager to settle into what they hoped would be a peaceful and welcoming environment. At first, things seemed fine. The neighbors were polite, though distant. The occasional nods from across the street, a brief hello at the mailbox, nothing out of the ordinary. But as the days turned into weeks, subtle signs of discomfort began to emerge. Lisa noticed how the friendly chatter among the other moms at the community park would quiet when she approached. Darnell caught glimpses of suspicious glances from neighbors when he pulled into the driveway after work. Ava mentioned that some of the kids at school weren't as welcoming as she had hoped. Still, they brushed it off. After all, adjusting to a new neighborhood took time, and not everyone warmed up immediately. Then, the incidents began. It started with minor inconveniences, trash cans knocked over, their mail arriving opened, a passive-aggressive note about keeping the neighborhood's standards intact left on their windshield. But soon, the harassment escalated. The Thompsons would wake up to find their car windows smeared with soap, their lawn mysteriously trampled overnight. Once, Lisa caught a man taking photos of their house from across the street. When she confronted him, he simply smirked and walked away. Darnell and Lisa tried to ignore it. They told themselves it was paranoia, that they were overreacting. But deep down, they knew something was wrong. Their presence in Oak Ridge Heights was unwelcome, and someone, or perhaps several people, wanted them to know it. One evening, as Darnell was grilling in the backyard, a voice from the other side of the fence made his blood run cold. "You people don't belong here." Darnell turned sharply, but the speaker had already disappeared. His fists clenched around the barbecue tongs, his pulse pounding. It wasn't just paranoia. This was real. Lisa, too, was beginning to feel the weight of the hostility. When she went for a jog in the mornings, she noticed the way some neighbors would avoid eye contact or cross the street. When she took the kids to the park, she overheard whispers, words like "those people" and "ruining the neighborhood." Then came the worst of it. An anonymous complaint to the Homeowners Association about the Thompsons bringing down property values. The complaint cited excessive noise and unruly behavior. Darnell and Lisa were stunned. Their family was quiet, respectful. They had done nothing wrong. They decided it was time to speak up. Lisa reached out to a few neighbors, hoping to clear up any misunderstandings. The responses were cold, dismissive. Some denied anything was happening. Others refused to speak at all. Then came the police call. It was a Saturday afternoon. The kids were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing in the warm air. Lisa was tending to her garden, humming along to a song playing from the outdoor speaker. That's when the police car rolled up. An officer stepped out, his expression neutral but firm. "We got a report about a disturbance." Lisa's stomach tightened. "A disturbance?" "We received a complaint about loud noise and possible trespassing on this property." Lisa glanced around. The only people in their yard were her children. "This is our home." The officer sighed, looking almost apologetic. "Ma'am, do you mind if I take a look around?" Darnell stepped forward from the porch, his voice calm but edged with frustration. "Look around for what? We live here. We own this house." The officer hesitated. He seemed to realize that the call had been baseless, but procedure dictated that he investigate. After a brief, half-hearted scan of the property, he nodded. "Everything looks fine. Sorry for the trouble." But it wasn't just trouble. It was a message. Someone had called the police on them simply for existing. That night, as Lisa and Darnell sat in their living room, exhaustion weighing them down, they knew they had to do something. They couldn't just endure this any longer. "We need to take this higher," Lisa said. Darnell nodded, jaw clenched. "It's time we let someone in power know what's happening." What they didn't know was that their fight for justice would soon reach the highest levels of their town's leadership, and that one man, the mayor, would step in to change everything. The following morning, Lisa sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Darnell stood by the window, staring out at the street, his jaw clenched. The weight of the previous day's events lingered in the air like an unshakable storm cloud. "We can't just sit here and let this keep happening," Lisa finally said, breaking the silence. Darnell sighed. "I know, but what do we do? We've already tried talking to people. That didn't get us anywhere." Lisa pulled out her phone. "We document everything. Every incident, every note, every time someone tries to intimidate us. If the HOA, the police, or the town's leadership won't take us seriously, we need proof." It was a start. That evening, Darnell installed a security camera above their front door while Lisa created a logbook detailing every incident they had faced since moving in. They didn't know if it would make a difference, but they had to try something. 2 nights later, their worst fears were confirmed. A loud bang jolted the Thompsons awake in the middle of the night. Darnell leaped out of bed and rushed to the window. His heart pounded as he saw a group of figures darting away under the dim glow of the streetlights. He hurried downstairs and threw open the front door. His breath hitched when he saw it, spray-painted in bright red across their garage door. "Get out!" Lisa gasped behind him, her hands covering her mouth. Ava and Jamal, woken by the commotion, stood at the top of the staircase, their frightened eyes wide with confusion. Darnell's hands trembled with anger as he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "We're reporting a hate crime," he said, his voice steady despite the rage boiling beneath the surface. Minutes later, a police car arrived. An officer stepped out, a middle-aged man with a bored expression. He examined the graffiti, took down some notes, and shook his head. "This could be a prank," he muttered. "A prank." Darnell's voice rose. "Someone vandalized our home and threatened my family." "How is that a prank?" The officer gave a half-hearted shrug. "No security footage? No witnesses? There's not much we can do." Darnell gritted his teeth. "That's why we called you, to investigate." The officer sighed. "I'll file a report, but unless we catch someone in the act, there's no real way to pursue this." Lisa stepped forward, her voice sharp. "So what? We're just supposed to sit here and wait for something worse to happen?" The officer didn't respond. Instead, he handed them a card with a case number scribbled on the back. "If anything else happens, give us a call." And with that, he left. Lisa stood frozen, staring at the hateful message on their garage. Darnell wrapped an arm around her, but he could feel the way she trembled. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a direct threat. By morning, word had spread throughout the neighborhood. Some of the neighbors avoided eye contact when they passed by. Others stole curious glances, whispering amongst themselves. But not a single person spoke up in support. That afternoon, Lisa decided to take action. She drove to the Oak Ridge Heights Homeowners Association office and requested a meeting with the board. "I want to file a formal complaint about the harassment my family has been facing," she told the receptionist. The woman, a thin-lipped woman named Mrs. Calloway, barely looked up from her computer. "We don't handle personal disputes, Mrs. Thompson." "This isn't a dispute," Lisa countered. "It's targeted harassment." Mrs. Calloway let out an exaggerated sigh. "We've received complaints about your household as well. Noise complaints, reports of disturbances. We strive to maintain a peaceful community, and unfortunately, there have been concerns." Lisa cut her off. "Concerns about us? We've been harassed since we moved here. Someone vandalized our home last night, and you're talking about noise complaints?" Mrs. Calloway's expression remained neutral. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing the HOA can do about this." Lisa clenched her fists, biting back the anger bubbling inside her. She stormed out, her heart pounding. Later that evening, the security camera Darnell had installed finally captured something. One of their neighbors, a man named Richard Calloway, the husband of the HOA receptionist, lurking near their property. He appeared to be taking pictures of their home. Darnell showed Lisa the footage. "I knew it. They're trying to push us out." Lisa swallowed hard. "If the HOA won't help us, and the police won't do anything, we need to take this higher." Darnell frowned. "How much higher?" Lisa set her jaw. "The mayor." Darnell hesitated. "You really think he'll care?" Lisa met his gaze, determination burning in her eyes. "He's going to have to." She opened her laptop and began drafting an email to Mayor Robert Whitmore, detailing everything: the harassment, the threats, the inaction from the police and HOA. She attached photos of the graffiti, the anonymous notes, and the footage of their neighbor snooping around. Before hitting send, she took a deep breath. Let's see if he's the kind of leader who actually stands up for what's right. And with that, she clicked send. What Lisa didn't expect was just how quickly things would escalate from there. The email was sent. Now, all Lisa and Darnell could do was wait. Days passed without a response. Lisa refreshed her inbox repeatedly, but there was nothing from Mayor Whitmore's office. The tension in their home grew heavier. Darnell barely slept, staying up to keep watch over their property. Lisa found herself jumping at every unexpected noise. Even the kids sensed it. Ava became quieter. Jamal no longer played outside like he used to. Then, on the fourth morning, Lisa's phone rang. She snatched it up, her heart hammering when she saw the caller ID. City Hall. Hello, she answered quickly. Mrs. Thompson? A deep, steady voice came through the line. This is Mayor Robert Whitmore. I received your email. Lisa nearly dropped the phone. She put it on speaker so Darnell could hear. Thank you for calling, Mr. Mayor. We weren't sure if. I'm going to be honest with you. Whitmore interrupted, his voice firm. I was disturbed by what I read. The harassment your family has faced is unacceptable, and I intend to look into it personally. Lisa's breath caught. You do? I do. There was a brief pause before he continued. I've forwarded your email to the police chief and the city attorney. I want to meet with you and your husband in person to discuss this. Are you available tomorrow morning? Lisa looked at Darnell, who nodded immediately. Yes, she said. We'll be there. After hanging up, Lisa and Darnell sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then, for the first time in weeks, they felt something close to hope. The next morning, they arrived at City Hall, nerves on edge. Mayor Whitmore's office was grand yet simple, lined with bookshelves and awards of recognition. He was a tall, middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and an air of quiet authority. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, he greeted, shaking their hands. Please have a seat. Lisa wasted no time. Mayor Whitmore, we moved to Oak Ridge Heights hoping for a safe, welcoming home for our children. Instead, we've been harassed, intimidated, and now outright threatened. The police dismissed our concerns, the HOA refuses to help, and now our neighbor is spying on us. We don't know what else to do. Whitmore leaned forward, listening intently. I read everything you sent me. I also made some calls this morning. Here's what I found out. He placed a file on the desk and opened it. Firstly, the police department received multiple complaints about your household. But when I asked to review the reports, I found nothing substantial. Just vague noise disturbances and suspicious activity. That tells me someone has been using the system to target you. Darnell clenched his fists. We figured as much. Whitmore nodded. Secondly, your HOA president, Gerald Mitchell, has a history of discrimination complaints. They were swept under the rug years ago, but I found records of minority families filing grievances against him. Lisa's stomach twisted. So this isn't the first time? No, Whitmore confirmed. And here's where things get interesting. He pulled out a document and slid it across the desk. Gerald Mitchell and your neighbor, Richard Calloway, own multiple rental properties together in Oak Ridge Heights. They have a vested interest in controlling who lives in the neighborhood. Darnell's eyes darkened. So they want us gone. Precisely, Whitmore said. They likely see you as a threat to their carefully curated community. He exhaled. I won't stand for this in my town. Lisa blinked in surprise. You believe us? Of course, I do, Whitmore said firmly. And I'm going to make sure this doesn't continue. He picked up his phone and dialed. Get me the police chief in my office immediately. And tell the city attorney I need legal options regarding discriminatory HOA practices. Darnell and Lisa exchanged glances. For the first time, it felt like someone in power was actually listening. 30 minutes later, Police Chief Harold Benson entered the office. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor. Mayor Whitmore, Benson greeted. You wanted to see me? Whitmore gestured toward Lisa and Darnell. This is the Thompson family. They've been dealing with racial harassment in their own neighborhood. Vandalism, false police reports, intimidation tactics. Benson frowned. I've seen the reports, but... No, Whitmore cut in. You haven't seen everything. He turned his monitor toward the police chief and played the footage of Richard Calloway snooping around the Thompson home. Benson's expression darkened. This is concerning. It's more than concerning, Harold, Whitmore said. It's targeted harassment. And I need to know why your department hasn't done anything about it. Benson sighed. I'll be honest with you. Mayor, some officers take neighborhood complaints at face value without digging deeper. It's possible these calls were taken as routine disturbances instead of recognizing a pattern of discrimination. Lisa crossed her arms. That's not good enough. I agree, Whitmore said. Chief, I want this case properly investigated. I also want officers briefed on implicit bias training. Oak Ridge Heights isn't going to be a breeding ground for this kind of behavior. Benson nodded. Understood. I'll start looking into past complaints and ensure the Thompson family gets the protection they need. Lisa felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was the first time anyone in authority had acknowledged their struggle. As the meeting wrapped up, Whitmore turned back to them. I'm not done yet. I want to make an example out of this HOA. No family should be driven out of their own home. What are you going to do? Darnell asked. Whitmore's eyes flashed with determination. I'm going to Oak Ridge Heights myself. Lisa's breath caught. What? Whitmore stood. I want to speak with the HOA board, and I want the local media there when I do it. Darnell let out a low whistle. You're serious? Whitmore nodded. I don't tolerate discrimination in this town, and it's time Oak Ridge Heights learns that. The Thompsons exchanged stunned looks. Maybe, just maybe, change was coming. The following morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with rumors. A handful of people had spotted Mayor Whitmore's car pulling into Oak Ridge Heights, and it wasn't long before the news spread like wildfire. Lisa and Darnell stood near their front door, watching as a small crowd formed near the HOA's clubhouse. Several local reporters had arrived, microphones and cameras at the ready. This is really happening, Darnell muttered. Lisa nodded, gripping his hand. Finally, the HOA board members, including Gerald Mitchell, were already there, standing stiffly as Mayor Whitmore approached. Richard Calloway was among them, his arms crossed over his chest, his usual smugness replaced with thinly veiled unease. Whitmore, accompanied by Police Chief Benson, strode up to the group with the confidence of a man who had come prepared. The cameras rolled as he addressed the crowd. Good morning, everyone, Whitmore began, his voice carrying over the murmuring residents. I'm here today because I was made aware of serious allegations regarding racial harassment in this neighborhood. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. As the mayor of this town, I have a responsibility to ensure that every resident, regardless of race, background, or status, feels safe in their home. His sharp gaze landed on Gerald Mitchell. And from what I've learned, that is not the case here in Oak Ridge Heights. Mitchell forced a tight smile. Mayor Whitmore, I think there's been some misunderstanding. No, there hasn't, Whitmore interrupted coolly. I've reviewed the police reports, I've examined past complaints against this HOA, and I've seen the video footage. Mitchell's face paled. Whitmore continued. For years, this community has been manipulated by individuals who think they can dictate who belongs here and who doesn't. That ends today. A murmur of agreement rose from some of the residents. Others shifted uncomfortably. Mitchell cleared his throat. Mr. Mayor, with all due respect, the HOA has rules in place to maintain the integrity of this neighborhood. Whitmore arched a brow. Rules? You mean the same rules that have been selectively enforced against certain families while others are given free passes? Mitchell opened his mouth, but the mayor wasn't finished. I've spoken with the city attorney. Effective immediately, the discriminatory practices of this HOA will be investigated, and any policies that have been used to target residents unfairly will be addressed. Furthermore, he turned to the cameras, I am launching a citywide review of all HOA complaints related to racial discrimination. The crowd reacted, some in shock, others in quiet approval. This is ridiculous, Calloway finally snapped. We're just trying to keep our neighborhood safe. We don't need outsiders coming in and... Outsiders? Whitmore repeated, his voice dangerously low. The Thompsons live here. They are not outsiders. They are homeowners. They are taxpayers. And they have every right to exist here without harassment. Lisa's heart pounded as she watched Calloway fume silently, unable to argue. Whitmore turned back to Chief Benson. I also want extra patrols in this neighborhood until we're certain the Thompsons and any other targeted families are safe. Benson nodded. Understood, sir. Lisa and Darnell exchanged a stunned glance. The mayor wasn't just offering words. He was taking action. The HOA meeting ended with tension so thick it was almost suffocating. By the time Whitmore left, the entire neighborhood had been shaken. But not everyone was pleased. That night, as Lisa put the kids to bed, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You think you won? You have no idea what's coming. Her blood ran cold. "Darnell," she called, showing him the screen. He swore under his breath. "We need to report this." They called the police immediately. This time, the response was swift. Officers arrived within minutes, took their statement, and reassured them that they would monitor the situation closely. By morning, another development had taken place, one they hadn't expected. The local news stations had picked up the story. The footage of Whitmore confronting the HOA was making rounds online. The town's residents, many of whom had never heard of Oak Ridge Heights issues, were suddenly invested. Some supported the Thompsons, sending messages of encouragement. Others were furious, claiming the mayor was overstepping his authority. Mitchell and Calloway, however, were in full panic mode. A week later, the city attorney announced a formal investigation into the HOA's leadership. Evidence of discriminatory practices, including emails exchanged between board members about keeping the neighborhood traditional, had surfaced. With the pressure mounting, Gerald Mitchell resigned as HOA president. Richard Calloway? He was suddenly very quiet. But the biggest shock came when the city council proposed a new ordinance restricting the power of HOAs in the city. Under the new rules, any HOA found to be engaging in discriminatory enforcement could be fined or dissolved. It was a monumental shift. Lisa and Darnell weren't just fighting for their own family anymore. They were helping to change the system. As the dust began to settle, the Thompsons finally felt a sense of peace. The threatening messages stopped. Their neighbors, some of whom had previously stayed silent, began to speak up in support. One afternoon, as Lisa sat on the porch watching Ava and Jamal play, an older woman from down the street approached. "I just wanted to say," she hesitated, then continued, "I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner. What happened to your family was wrong." Lisa offered a small smile. "Thank you." The woman nodded. "If you ever need anything, just know, you're not alone in this neighborhood." For the first time since they had moved in, Lisa actually believed that. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Oak Ridge Heights had ever seen. What had started as a small-scale neighborhood dispute had grown into a movement that challenged the very foundation of how HOAs operated in the city. For the first time in years, residents began attending HOA meetings in large numbers, not just to watch, but to participate. The days of quiet compliance were over. The new HOA president, a middle-aged woman named Clara Jennings, had wasted no time in making drastic changes. "The old way of doing things is gone," she announced during her first public meeting. "We will no longer be an HOA that enforces biased policies or intimidates residents. We are here to build a community, not a dictatorship." Applause erupted in the room, something unheard of in previous meetings. Lisa and Darnell, sitting in the front row, exchanged hopeful glances. This was what they had fought for. Beyond Oak Ridge Heights, the effects of their battle rippled across the city. Mayor Whitmore, now fully committed to reforming HOAs, had begun working on new citywide housing policies aimed at preventing racial discrimination in suburban neighborhoods. The ordinance limiting HOA power had passed, and additional protections for homeowners were being introduced. Lisa had never imagined that their personal nightmare would lead to legislative change, but it did. Meanwhile, Gerald Mitchell's resignation had not gone unnoticed. The city attorney's office had uncovered multiple instances of financial misconduct within the HOA's books. Though he avoided criminal charges, he was banned from serving on any HOA board in the city for the next decade. As for Richard Calloway, he quietly put his house on the market and moved out of Oak Ridge Heights. Lisa and Darnell didn't celebrate his departure, but they did acknowledge it as a sign of change. The people who thrived on intimidation and control were no longer welcome. It took time, but the neighborhood began to shift in a more positive direction. Neighbors who had once remained silent now greeted the Thompsons with warmth. Invitations for neighborhood events started arriving in their mailbox, not as a formality, but as a genuine attempt at inclusion. One Saturday morning, Lisa stepped outside to see Ava and Jamal playing with a group of neighborhood kids. No judgment, no barriers, just kids being kids. A soft smile spread across her face. "This is what it should have been from the start," she murmured. Darnell joined her on the porch, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. "Yeah," he agreed. "But at least it's finally happening." Their battle had been exhausting, terrifying at times, but it had made a difference, not just for their family, but for the future of Oak Ridge Heights. And most importantly, their children would grow up in a place where they didn't have to feel like outsiders in their own home. Lisa sat down one evening to write about everything they had gone through. She wanted to document their experience, not just for themselves, but for anyone else going through a similar struggle. As she typed, she reflected on everything they had learned. Silence enables oppression. If they had never spoken up, the discrimination would have continued unchecked. Community is built by action. It wasn't enough to hope for things to change. They had to force that change through persistence. A real progress is slow but possible. It had taken months of stress, backlash, and uncertainty, but in the end, they had made a difference. She finished her final sentence and exhaled deeply. It was a long journey, but one thing was certain. They had turned their house into a home, and no one could take that away from them again.